For most of what we call history, humanity does not exist. The camera moves slowly over a dark, endless desert. Wind shapes the sand into waves that look like a frozen ocean. No cities. No roads. No monuments. Just earth and sky. And yet, humans were already here. Modern textbooks often begin civilization with the first cities: Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley. Stone walls. Written records. Kings. Laws. Agriculture. A world that looks familiar in structure, even if distant in time. But anatomically, modern humans have existed for over 200,000 years. Which means for more than 95% of our story, there were no cities, no states, no empires, no writing. And this is where the mystery begins. Because the people who lived during that immense span of time were not primitive in the way we often imagine. Their brains were the same as ours. Their emotional range, their capacity for memory, imagination, fear, hope, all of it already present. They looked at the night sky and saw the same stars. They buried their dead. They created art. They survived in environments that would challenge modern systems. So the question is not whether they were intelligent. The question is, what kind of world did intelligent humans build before civilization? Modern historians say civilization begins when people settle, farm, and form cities. This model is neat, linear, comforting. First survival, then farming, then religion, then states, then history. But the archaeological record is not a complete book. It is a handful of pages, torn, burned, and scattered. The camera rises over a limestone ridge in southeastern Turkey. Dry grass bends in the wind. The land looks empty, until the soil is peeled back. Beneath it, massive stone pillars emerge, arranged in circles, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older than pottery. This place is called Göbekli Tepe. Discovered in the late 20th century, it forced archaeologists to reconsider a basic assumption, that complex building projects required agriculture and settled life. But Göbekli Tepe predates both. Its towering T-shaped pillars are carved with animals, foxes, birds, snakes, boars, rendered with deliberate skill. The enclosures suggest planning, coordination, shared meaning. Yet when the site was first active, humans in the region were still hunter-gatherers. No evidence of cities. No writing. No metal tools. And yet, architecture. This is where it gets interesting. For decades, the dominant idea was simple. Farming created surplus food. Surplus food created specialization. Specialization created religion, art, and hierarchy. Civilization flowed from agriculture like branches from a trunk. But Göbekli Tepe suggests something different. It hints that belief, symbolism, and large-scale cooperation may have come first. The camera moves between the pillars. Close-up carvings catch the light. The stone is cold, ancient, patient. Who gathered here? Not farmers tied to fields, but mobile groups. People who moved with seasons, with animals, with changing landscapes. And yet they returned again and again to construct and maintain this monumental site. Modern historians say it may have been a ritual center. A place of gathering, ceremony, shared identity. That explanation fits the evidence we have. But the records show something equally important. We do not know what most of their lives looked like. Because hunter-gatherer societies leave light footprints. Wood decays. Fiber rots. Oral knowledge vanishes with the last voice that holds it. Stone survives. Everything else fades. Which means the picture we see of the deep past is shaped not just by what existed, but by what could endure. This is where the mystery deepens. If monumental structures could exist before agriculture, then our timeline of social complexity becomes less certain. The gap between simple and civilized begins to blur. The camera pulls back. Göbekli Tepe becomes a small shape in a vast landscape. Beyond it stretch thousands of years we barely understand, the Ice Age world. Sea levels were lower. Coastlines lay far from where they are today. Plains that are now underwater were once habitable land. Rivers flowed differently. Climate shifted in dramatic pulses. Entire human landscapes now rest beneath oceans. Modern historians say we must be careful not to project modern systems into the past. That caution is necessary. Evidence matters. Speculation must be measured. But another caution is just as important. We must not assume absence of evidence is evidence of absence. Because if most early human activity took place along coasts, river deltas, and fertile lowlands, the very regions later swallowed by rising seas at the end of the Ice Age, then a vast archive of human life may lie beyond our reach. Imagine generations who knew complex seasonal patterns, navigation routes, ecological relationships, stories that encoded survival knowledge. None of it written. All of it real. But the records show history favors what leaves stone. The camera fades to darkness. A cave wall appears, lit by flickering firelight. Hands press pigment against rock. Animal shapes leap across stone in motion frozen for tens of thousands of years. Cave art from places like Lascaux and Chauvet proves symbolic thought long predates cities. Perspective, motion, narrative, meaning. These are not the marks of minds waiting to become human. They already were. So here is the tension at the heart of the mystery. If humans thought like us, if they could cooperate at scale, if they created symbolic worlds, why do we imagine their societies were simple? This is not a claim that they built skyscrapers or lost machines. The evidence does not support that. But the idea that complexity begins only with walls and writing may say more about what we can see than what once existed. The camera returns to open sky. Stars emerge. For most of our existence, humans lived under this same sky without the structures we associate with civilization. Yet they survived ice ages, shifting climates, predators, and each other. They passed knowledge across generations without paper. They navigated landscapes without maps. They shaped environments in subtle ways we are only beginning to understand. But here's where it gets interesting. The transition into agriculture, often described as a sudden breakthrough, was not immediate everywhere. For thousands of years, humans experimented, mixed strategies, adopted and abandoned cultivation. The shift was uneven, hesitant. Almost as if something was being relearned, or reconfigured, rather than invented from nothing. This is not proof of a lost civilization. But it does suggest that the line between before and after civilization is not as sharp as we once believed. This is where the investigation begins. Not into a forgotten empire, but into a forgotten world. A human world that existed before cities defined what it meant to be advanced. A world where intelligence was already modern. Where cooperation could raise stone monuments. Where meaning existed without writing. And as we move deeper into the evidence, we are left with a quiet but unsettling possibility. What we call the dawn of civilization may not be the beginning of complexity. It may simply be the moment complexity became visible. The map of the ancient world does not look like the one we know. The camera glides over a modern globe. Coastlines glow faintly, then begin to shift. Sea levels fall. Continental shelves emerge. What was once ocean becomes land. Vast plains appear where today only water exists. At the height of the last ice age, around 20,000 years ago, sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than today. Entire regions now submerged were once dry, habitable terrain. And this is where the mystery deepens. Because humans have always been drawn to water. Rivers, lakes, coasts, these environments offer food, mobility, fertile soil, and trade routes. If early complex communities existed, these are exactly the places we would expect to find them. But the records show those same regions are now underwater. Modern historians say coastal archaeology is one of the greatest missing chapters in human history. Not because something extraordinary must be hidden there, but because we simply cannot see most of it. Rising seas at the end of the Ice Age erased shorelines that had supported people for thousands of years. The camera dives below the surface. Sunlight filters through blue water. The seafloor stretches out in silence, a drowned landscape of ridges and valleys. Somewhere down there are ancient river mouths, former estuaries, long-vanished beaches where humans once walked. We know this not from myth but from geology. At the end of the Ice Age, massive ice sheets melted. Sea levels rose rapidly in pulses. Entire ecosystems shifted. Coastlines retreated inland. Lowlands disappeared. For communities living there, this would not have been an abstract statistic. It would have been a lived crisis. But here's where it gets interesting. Archaeology on land gives us the illusion of stability. Layers build up. Artifacts remain. But coastal regions, the most attractive habitats, are among the least preserved. Underwater archaeology is difficult, expensive, and still in early stages compared to traditional excavation. Which means our model of early human life is shaped by what survived above sea level. This is where perspective matters. Imagine trying to reconstruct modern civilization thousands of years from now, but only from what remains in mountain regions. Coastal megacities, ports, and lowland infrastructure gone. Only scattered traces inland. The picture would be distorted, incomplete. Modern historians say we must be careful with analogies like this. The past is not the present. Technologies differ. Scales differ. That is true. But the principle remains: preservation shapes narrative. The camera shifts to a submerged landscape off the coast of India, then to the Black Sea shelf, then to Southeast Asia's Sunda Shelf, once a vast connected landmass linking islands now separated by water. These were not small areas. They were entire worlds. Humans migrating through these regions would have had generations to form traditions, routes, seasonal gathering places, shared knowledge networks. Most of it organic, oral, adaptable. But the records show that when sea levels rose, these landscapes vanished beneath water that does not preserve wood, fiber, or everyday tools well. Stone structures, if they existed, would be rare and deeply buried. This is not evidence of hidden cities. It is evidence of lost context. And context is everything. This is where the mystery takes shape. We are trying to understand a species that lived intelligently across vast territories, using tools, language, and social systems, while only seeing fragments from the least representative environments. The camera cuts to glacial ice melting into torrents of water. Rivers swell. Plains flood. Shorelines retreat. For communities at the edge of continents, this change would have been gradual in a lifetime, but relentless across generations. Stories of receding land. Sacred places swallowed. Migration inland. Modern historians say such environmental changes likely shaped myth, memory, and cultural identity. Not as literal historical records, but as emotional truths passed through narrative. But the records show similar flood stories appear in distant cultures. This does not prove a single source. Floods are common experiences in river valleys. Human imagination tends towards similar motifs. Yet the recurrence of worlds before ours in myth raises an intriguing possibility. That cultural memory sometimes preserves the feeling of deep transitions, even if details blur. This is where we must stay careful. Possibility is not proof. But absence of proof is not closure. The camera lingers on waves rolling over a quiet sea at sunset. Beneath that surface could lie campsites, pathways, gathering areas, places where human lives unfolded for thousands of years without stone monuments to mark them. Modern historians say civilization is visible where stone, writing, and permanent architecture appear. But the records show human complexity is older than those markers. So we are left with a subtle but important distinction. The beginning of visible civilization is not necessarily the beginning of complex human worlds. And this changes how we read the silence. When we look at the deep past and see nothing, we may not be seeing emptiness. We may be seeing water, time, decay, geological erasure. This is where the investigation shifts from what we have to what we cannot easily access. The camera rises above the ocean again, pulling back to reveal the curve of the earth. Continents, seas, clouds. Most of human history unfolded on this planet before the first city walls rose. We know they spoke. We know they planned. We know they cooperated. We know they created meaning. But how they organized their world, socially, spiritually, intellectually, remains mostly invisible. And as we continue forward, the question grows sharper. If complex gathering places like Göbekli Tepe existed on land, what kinds of human landscapes might have existed along the coasts we can no longer reach? We cannot claim they were cities. We cannot claim lost technologies. But we also cannot claim certainty that we understand the full range of human possibility before civilization. The camera fades to black. Because the deeper we go into the past, the more we realize how much of it is missing. Long before the first walls rose from Earth, the human mind was already modern. The camera moves through a cave passage, narrow and silent. A torch flame flickers. Light spills across stone, and suddenly shapes appear. Horses in motion. Lions mid-stride. Hands pressed against rock in negative silhouettes. These images are over 30,000 years old. And they are not simple. They show perspective, movement, intention, symbolic thought. Modern historians say cave art marks one of the clearest signs that humans had fully developed cognitive abilities deep in prehistory. The ability to imagine, to represent, to assign meaning beyond immediate survival. But here's where it gets interesting. The mental leap required to paint a moving animal on stone is not small. It involves memory, abstraction, shared understanding of symbols. These are the same mental tools later used to design temples, organize societies, and write stories. Which raises a quiet question. If the mind was already capable, what limited the structures we associate with civilization? The camera tracks a group of prehistoric hunters across an open plain. This is not fiction, but a reconstruction grounded in anthropology. Small groups, yes. Mobile, yes. But also deeply knowledgeable. They would have tracked seasonal migrations, understood plant cycles, navigated vast territories without maps. Their survival depended on collective memory stored not in books, but in people. Modern historians say oral cultures can hold astonishing amounts of information. Navigation routes encoded in song. Genealogies remembered across generations. Ecological knowledge embedded in myth. But the records show oral systems leave little behind. When the chain breaks, the archive disappears. This is where the mystery deepens. Because complexity does not always look like stone. The camera shifts to a night sky untouched by modern light. Stars blaze in impossible clarity. Constellations stretch across the dark. For tens of thousands of years, humans lived under this sky. Night after night. Season after season. Patterns would have been noticed. Cycles tracked. Stories attached to stars to help remember time, direction, ritual calendars. Modern historians say early astronomy likely began in this era, not with telescopes but with attention. Again, not proof of formal science, but evidence of minds engaged with systems larger than immediate survival. But the records show something else. Burial sites from deep prehistory contain grave goods, pigments, arranged bodies. Signs of ritual, belief, concern with death and perhaps with what comes after. These practices suggest shared symbolic worlds, invisible frameworks that shaped behavior. And this matters. Because large-scale cooperation, the kind needed to build monuments or organize communities, depends on shared beliefs, shared narratives, shared meaning. Göbekli Tepe did not appear in a vacuum. It emerged from minds already capable of symbolism, ritual, and coordinated action. This is where we confront a bias in how we imagine the past. We often equate complexity with permanence. Cities, stone, writing. But mobile societies can be intellectually complex while materially light. The camera follows a river through changing seasons. Groups return to the same places at certain times of year. Meeting points. Exchange of tools, ideas, stories, genes. Modern historians say such networks likely existed widely in prehistory. Not states. Not empires. But webs of connection. This is where the mystery shifts. Instead of asking, why didn't they build cities earlier? We might ask, did they need to? Agriculture brings surplus. Surplus brings population density. Density brings hierarchy, conflict, disease, and also innovation. But before farming, mobility itself was a strategy. Flexibility. Adaptation. Knowledge of wide territories. The camera lingers on a carved pillar at Göbekli Tepe again. Animals arranged in symbolic scenes. Meaning without text. This suggests that long before writing, humans already constructed shared symbolic universes, ways of understanding the world that could unite large groups temporarily. Modern historians say writing often arises for administration, accounting, property, control. But human meaning-making predates bureaucracy. But the records show writing freezes knowledge in place. Before that, knowledge lived in motion. This is where a subtle possibility emerges. What if this simplicity we attribute to pre-civilized humans reflects our difficulty seeing systems that were fluid, oral, and landscape-based? Not cities, but territories woven with story. Not monuments everywhere, but significant places remembered and revisited. Not written law, but social rules embedded in tradition. This is not a claim of hidden empires. It is a reminder that our definition of advanced may be narrower than human potential has been. The camera moves from cave art to carved stone to open sky. The same mind links them all. This is where the mystery becomes philosophical as much as historical. If intelligence, symbolism, cooperation, and ritual all existed long before civilization, then civilization may represent not the birth of complexity, but a shift in how complexity is expressed. From mobile to settled. From oral to written. From flexible networks to fixed hierarchies. Modern historians say this transition changed everything: diet, disease patterns, social inequality, technology, environment. But the records show the mind that made that transition was already ancient. So we are left with a quiet realization. The deep past was not empty. It was full of humans like us. Thinking, imagining, organizing their world in ways we can barely glimpse. And as we move forward in this investigation, we carry a growing awareness. The question is no longer whether complexity existed before civilization. The question is how much of it we have lost the ability to see. Civilizations are often defined by what they build. But before cities, before walls, before writing, the greatest force shaping human life was something else. The climate. The camera sweeps across a frozen landscape. Ice stretches to the horizon in towering sheets. Winds howl across a world locked in cold. This was Earth during the last ice age, a planet of extremes where survival depended not just on skill but on adaptability. Modern historians say Ice Age humans lived in small, mobile groups, adjusting constantly to changing environments. But the records show the Ice Age was not a stable period of endless cold. It pulsed, warmed, froze again. Sudden shifts, sometimes within decades. And this is where the mystery deepens. Because around 12,900 years ago, just as the climate was warming and human groups were spreading into new territories, something abrupt happened. Temperatures in parts of the northern hemisphere dropped sharply. This period is known as the Younger Dryas. The camera shows forests retreating, grasslands shifting, animals migrating. Ecosystems reorganize. For humans, this was not a scientific term. It was disruption. Modern historians say the cause may have involved meltwater pulses altering ocean circulation. Other hypotheses exist, debated but unresolved. What matters is the effect: a sudden return to near-glacial conditions after a warming trend. For communities experimenting with new ways of living, including early plant cultivation in some regions, this would have been destabilizing. But here's where it gets interesting. The end of the Younger Dryas, around 11,700 years ago, marks the beginning of the Holocene, the relatively stable climate period in which all recorded civilizations emerged. Stability, regular seasons, predictable rainfall patterns, the kind of environmental consistency that makes farming viable on large scales. But the records show that just before this stable era began, humans were already building Göbekli Tepe, which places that monumental effort near a time of climatic uncertainty. This is where the mystery sharpens. Why invest massive labor into stone enclosures during environmental stress? Modern historians say ritual and social cohesion may intensify during periods of uncertainty. Shared belief systems can stabilize groups when the natural world feels unstable. That explanation is plausible, supported by anthropological parallels. But the records show large gatherings require coordination across groups, across territories. Networks must already exist. Shared symbols must already hold meaning. Göbekli Tepe, then, may not be the start of complexity. It may be a response to pressure. The camera tracks migrating herds across changing landscapes. Human groups follow. Water sources shrink, shift, reappear. Climate does not just shape food. It shapes movement, interaction, and possibly conflict. Modern historians say environmental stress can accelerate social change. Innovations spread faster. Old patterns break. New systems emerge. Agriculture, once a marginal experiment, may have become more attractive when wild resources grew unpredictable. But the records show the transition was still gradual. No instant revolution. Thousands of years of overlap between foraging and farming, which suggests adaptation, not sudden invention. This is where the investigation touches a larger pattern. Throughout history, environmental shifts often precede major social transformations. The fall of some civilizations correlates with droughts. Migrations follow climate stress. Political structures shift under ecological pressure. So when we look at the deep past, we must ask, were early large-scale social changes driven not just by ideas, but by survival? The camera returns to the stone pillars. Their surfaces are worn, but the carvings endure. In a world where climate could change within a generation, fixed points, ritual sites, gathering centers, might anchor identity. Places to renew bonds, exchange knowledge, coordinate movement. Modern historians say we should not overinterpret symbolic carvings. Meaning is difficult to recover. We cannot read their stories. But the records show repetition of animal motifs, structured layouts, deliberate burial of older enclosures beneath newer ones. Acts that suggest continuity, memory, intention across generations. This is where the mystery takes on a human scale. Imagine living in a world where landscapes you knew as a child no longer look the same as an adult. Rivers shift. Animals disappear. Weather grows unpredictable. In such a world, knowledge becomes precious. Shared rituals become stabilizing. Gathering places become more than physical structures. They become anchors in time. This does not prove advanced lost societies. But it does suggest that social complexity and symbolic systems could intensify long before cities, especially under pressure. Modern historians say the Holocene's stability allowed agriculture to expand, populations to grow, settlements to persist. But the records show the mind that built civilization had already weathered chaos, which leads to a quiet, unsettling thought. What we call the birth of civilization may have followed a period of stress, adaptation, and reorganization, a long preparation shaped by forces far beyond human control. The camera rises above shifting ice, melting rivers, expanding forests. Human history did not unfold on a steady stage. It unfolded on a moving one. And as we continue forward, another question begins to surface. If climate upheaval helped reshape human societies once, how many earlier reorganizations might have occurred in the deep past, leaving little trace except in stone, symbol, and the silent gaps in the record? Before history was written, it was remembered. The camera moves across a firelit gathering. Faces glow in the dark. Voices rise and fall in rhythm. A story passes from one generation to the next, not as entertainment alone but as memory, instruction, identity. Modern historians say oral traditions are not primitive substitutes for writing. They are complex systems of preservation, capable of carrying information across centuries when reinforced by ritual, repetition, and meaning. But the records show that once the chain of transmission breaks, the archive disappears. This is where the mystery deepens. Because across distant cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, we find recurring themes in ancient myth. Earlier ages, worlds before the present one, great floods, resets of order, knowledge lost and renewed. These stories are not treated as scientific accounts. Nor should they be. They are symbolic narratives shaped by culture, metaphor, and belief. But here's where it gets interesting. They often describe transitions, not static worlds but turning points. A time before the current order. A disruption. A refounding. Modern historians say such patterns reflect universal human concerns. Survival, morality, the unpredictability of nature. Floods, for example, are common experiences in river-based societies. It is natural that water becomes a powerful symbol of destruction and renewal. That explanation carries weight. But the records show that these myths also function as containers of identity. They answer not just what happened, but who we are now. The camera drifts over ancient river valleys. The Tigris and Euphrates, the Nile, the industry. Later civilizations flourished here, each with stories of beginnings, of earlier times when the world was different. Not necessarily technological difference, but cosmic difference. A shift in order. This is where we must tread carefully. Myth is not a map. It does not give dates or coordinates. It reshapes memory into meaning. Yet memory, even symbolic memory, often grows from experience. Consider this. Communities living through rising sea levels at the end of the Ice Age, watching familiar lands vanish over generations. For them, the story of a world before the waters would not be abstraction. It would be lived reality, transformed into narrative over time. Modern historians say we cannot directly equate myth with specific prehistoric events. Cultures change. Stories merge. Motifs travel. But the records show some oral traditions preserve environmental details with surprising longevity, coastlines, volcanic eruptions, astronomical events encoded in story. This suggests that while myth reshapes fact, it may still echo deep experiences. This is where the investigation becomes subtle. We are not looking for literal accounts of lost cities. We are looking at how human groups remember transitions, especially those that redefine the world. The camera returns to Göbekli Tepe. Stone pillars rise under open sky. No writing explains their purpose. No text tells their story. But the carvings imply narrative, a symbolic language we cannot read. These people lived in a time before writing but not before meaning. Their stories too would have traveled through voice, ritual, and place. But the records show that when societies shift, when lifestyles change from mobile to settled, from oral to written, earlier layers of memory can fade or be reinterpreted. The arrival of agriculture did not just change food. It changed time, calendars, property, boundaries. Stories rooted in moving landscapes might lose relevance in fixed settlements. This is where the mystery widens. What kinds of knowledge, once central, became background noise? What traditions faded because new systems made them unnecessary? Modern historians say we must resist romanticizing lost knowledge. Many early lives were harsh. Lifespans were short. Survival was uncertain. That reality stands. But complexity of thought is not measured by comfort. The camera lingers on hands tracing patterns in sand, erased by wind moments later. Most of human memory may have existed like this, meaningful, shared but impermanent, which means the shift to writing was not just a technological change. It was a filter. What could be written, stored, and administrated gained permanence. What remained oral risked disappearance. This is where a quiet possibility emerges. The deep past may have been rich in narratives about origins, environments, and human roles within nature, frameworks that guided behavior for thousands of years. But when new economic and political systems arose, Those older frameworks may have transformed into myth, legend, or ritual, their practical roots obscured. Modern historians say history begins when writing begins. But the records show humanity began telling its story long before that. We just no longer have most of the chapters. The camera pulls back from the firelit circle into darkness. Voices fade. The story continues, but we cannot hear it clearly anymore. And as we move forward, we carry a growing awareness. What survives from the deep past is not necessarily what mattered most. It is simply what endured the longest. Civilization is often measured by its records. Tablets, inscriptions, archives. But before knowledge was stored in clay and stone, it lived somewhere else. In memory. In practice. In the relationship between people and landscape. The camera follows a winding trail across an open plain at dawn. Footprints fade behind. No roads. No signposts. Yet the path is known. Passed down through generations not by maps, but by story and repetition. Modern historians say many hunter-gatherer societies maintain highly detailed mental maps of water sources, seasonal plants, migration routes, weather patterns. Knowledge embedded in narrative, song, ritual. But the records show such systems leave almost nothing behind for archaeologists to recover. Which means we are studying a species that lived successfully for tens of thousands of years, while missing most of its operating manual. This is where the mystery deepens. Because survival in Ice Age environments required more than instinct. It required planning, coordination, and predictive understanding of nature. When to move. Where to find resources in lean seasons. Which plants heal and which harm. Modern historians say this knowledge is empirical, built through observation over generations. Not science in the modern institutional sense, but systematic nonetheless. But here's where it gets interesting. Such knowledge is often inseparable from belief systems. Rituals tied to hunting. Stories linked to landscapes. Moral rules connected to ecological balance. The camera lingers on a carved stone from Göbekli Tepe again. Animals arranged in deliberate sequences. We cannot read it. But it may represent a symbolic system, a way of encoding meaning about the world. This is where the mystery shifts from material remains to invisible structures. A society can be highly organized without cities if its order is embedded in shared knowledge rather than infrastructure. Modern historians say writing allows information to outlast individuals, enabling administration, law, and large states. But the records show writing also transforms knowledge, separating it from context, standardizing it, making it portable. Before writing, knowledge stayed tied to place and person. Lose the place. Lose the people. Lose the knowledge. This may explain why so much of the deep past feels silent. The camera moves through a dense forest. Plants known to be edible or medicinal pass by. To an untrained observer, it is just greenery. To someone raised within that system, it is a pharmacy, a calendar, a guide. Complexity is present, but invisible to outsiders. This is where a subtle possibility arises. When early agricultural societies formed, they did not start from ignorance. They emerged from populations already carrying vast ecological and social knowledge. Farming was not a spark in darkness. It was one path among many, gradually adopted under changing conditions. Modern historians say early farmers likely retained older knowledge systems alongside new practices. But over time, as populations grew and society stratified, certain kinds of knowledge became privileged. Those useful for administration, trade, taxation. But the records show that knowledge not aligned with new structures can fade. Skills for navigating wide territories matter less in fixed settlements. Oral histories tied to seasonal migration lose context. Spiritual systems rooted in landscapes shift as landscapes are reshaped. This is not a story of sudden loss. It is a slow narrowing. The camera returns to the stars again. Ancient people would have tracked their movements for timing migrations and rituals. Some of the world's earliest monumental alignments, later in the Neolithic, reflect astronomical awareness. But that awareness likely predates the monuments themselves. Which means the knowledge came first. The structures came later. This is where the mystery becomes almost paradoxical. We tend to think of history as an accumulation of knowledge. But transitions can also involve forgetting, or transforming knowledge into forms we no longer recognize. Modern historians say progress is uneven. Gains in one domain can coincide with losses in another. Agriculture brought food surplus and population growth. It also brought new diseases, labor demands, and social hierarchies. But the records show the people who made this shift were not blank slates. They carried deep traditions, skills, and worldviews from earlier ways of life. How much of that intellectual world survived? How much dissolved as societies reorganized? The camera drifts over ruins of later civilizations, stones, walls, broken inscriptions. These are visible. But what about systems that never relied on stone? This is where the investigation reaches a quiet but profound idea. Perhaps the deep past contained forms of organization, knowledge, and meaning that were highly effective in their context, but left little trace once the context changed. Not lost technologies, but lost ways of knowing. Modern historians say we must be careful not to romanticize the past. Early life was vulnerable, uncertain. That is true. Yet vulnerability does not equal simplicity. The camera fades to a vast landscape at sunset. No cities. No monuments. Only land, sky, and the possibility of countless human stories that once unfolded there. We see emptiness. But the records show humans stood here for tens of thousands of years, thinking, learning, teaching. And as we move forward, the mystery grows more philosophical than archaeological. If knowledge can exist without records, if complexity can exist without cities, then how much of human history lies not buried in the ground, but vanished with the last people who remembered it? For most of human existence, power did not live in palaces. It lived in relationships. The camera moves across an open landscape dotted with small groups. People gather, disperse, meet again in shifting patterns. Leadership is situational. The best tracker leads the hunt, the most knowledgeable elder guides ritual, the skilled negotiator settles conflict. Modern anthropological research suggests many mobile societies operate through flexible authority rather than rigid hierarchies. Influence flows from knowledge, trust, and social bonds. But the records show these systems leave little monumental trace. No thrones. No royal tombs. No inscriptions declaring rule. Which means when we look back through archaeology, power seems to appear suddenly, at the same time as cities, walls, and kings. This is where the mystery deepens. Because power itself did not suddenly come into existence with civilization. What changed was not the presence of influence, but its visibility. The camera shifts to early urban centers thousands of years later. Mud brick walls rise. Storage rooms fill with grain. Administrative tablets mark quantities, labor, ownership. Modern historians say writing emerges partly to manage complexity, accounting, trade, taxation. As settlements grow, informal systems become insufficient. Records become necessary. But here's where it gets interesting. The same process that makes knowledge permanent also makes authority permanent. Before writing, memory lived in people. After writing, it lives in institutions. Before cities, power was embedded in social webs. After cities, power can be centralized, inherited, displayed. The records show the earliest written texts are often economic, lists, inventories, transactions. Civilization's first words are not poetry. They are administration. This marks a shift. Complexity moves from invisible networks to visible structures. This is where the investigation touches something profound. If earlier societies were organized through flexible, oral, and relational systems, then their complexity might not resemble later states, but it was complexity nonetheless. The camera returns to Göbekli Tepe one more time. Massive pillars erected without clear evidence of permanent settlement. Some archaeologists propose that ritual gatherings themselves helped create social cohesion that later made larger settlements possible. In this view, symbolic systems precede political ones. But the records show that once agriculture allows surplus storage, new forms of inequality become possible. Those who control storage, land, or labor gain sustained power. Power crystallizes. This is not a moral judgment. It is a structural change. The camera shows fields under cultivation. Seasons become cycles of planting and harvest. Boundaries form. Property concepts emerge. Modern historians say this transition brings both stability and constraint. Larger populations can be supported. But mobility decreases. Social roles solidify. This is where history becomes easier to see. Fixed settlements produce layers. Buildings replace atop buildings. Artifacts accumulate. Hierarchies leave material signatures. Before this, complexity moved like wind across the land. After this, it leaves ruins. This is where the mystery shifts again. We often interpret the rise of visible hierarchy as the rise of organization itself. But what if organization existed long before, simply in forms we struggle to detect? Flexible networks do not fossilize well. The camera cuts between two worlds. One of shifting camps, oral agreements, knowledge carried in memory. Another of walls, granaries, written contracts. Both involve coordination. Both require rules. Both require shared belief. but only one leaves abundant archaeological footprints. Modern historians say early states developed mechanisms of control, taxation, labor obligations, codified law. Writing reinforces authority. Records legitimize decisions. But the records show these systems can also narrow participation. Authority becomes concentrated. This leads to a quiet realization. Civilization does not just create new possibilities. It selects which kinds of complexity become dominant. Other forms, mobile, oral, landscape-based, recede. This is not disappearance overnight. Many lifeways continue alongside early states for millennia. But the center of historical visibility shifts. The camera pulls back to show a timeline stretching across tens of thousands of years. For most of it, human organization leaves light traces. Then, suddenly in geological terms, the record brightens. Cities, monuments, texts. We call this the beginning. But this is where the mystery becomes philosophical again. What if this is not the beginning of human complexity, but the beginning of recorded power? Modern historians say civilization allows knowledge to accumulate across generations in new ways. Science, literature, law, all depend on record keeping. That is true. But the records show the price of permanence is transformation. Knowledge detached from place. Authority detached from person. Memory externalized. And so we arrive at a turning point in our investigation. The deep past may not have lacked structure. It may have operated through systems that did not need stone, script, or states. Then climate stabilized. Agriculture spread. Populations grew. And complexity changed form. From fluid to fixed. From remembered to recorded. From relational to institutional. The camera fades to the silhouette of early city walls against a rising sun. A new chapter of humanity begins, one we can see clearly. But behind those walls stretches a far longer era, where power, knowledge, and meaning shaped human worlds we are only beginning to imagine. When we step back far enough, the details begin to blur. Stone pillars, cave paintings, submerged coastlines, oral traditions, climate shifts, invisible knowledge systems. The slow rise of visible power. Individually, each piece is incomplete. Together, they form a pattern. The camera pulls high above the earth. Time accelerates. Ice advances and retreats. Coastlines redraw themselves. Human groups move like currents across continents. Modern historians say civilization arose independently in several regions under the right conditions. Stable climate, domesticable plants and animals, growing populations. That model is supported by evidence. But the records show something equally important. The capacities required for civilization, intelligence, symbolism, cooperation, long predate the first cities. This is where the mystery deepens into implication. If the human mind was already modern, if large-scale gathering and symbolic systems existed before agriculture, if vast coastal worlds are now lost beneath the sea, if knowledge once lived in oral, place-based systems, then the rise of civilization may not mark the sudden birth of complexity. It may mark a threshold of visibility. The camera moves through layers of earth like pages in a book. Most pages are blank. A few contain traces, stone tools, pigments, bones. History as we know it is written from the pages that survived. Modern historians say we must build narratives only from evidence. That discipline protects us from imagination replacing fact. But the records show evidence itself is shaped by preservation. What endures is not always what was most significant. This is where perspective becomes crucial. Imagine a world rich in human meaning but materially light. Networks of exchange, shared rituals, ecological knowledge systems stretching across regions. No cities. Few permanent structures. Such a world could persist for millennia, stable, adaptive, yet leave minimal archaeological footprint. Then climate stabilizes. Agriculture spreads. Population density increases. Settlements become permanent. Writing emerges. Suddenly, complexity begins to fossilize. The camera lingers on the first clay tablets, then cuts to ancient temples, then to city walls. Visibility increases. History brightens. But here's where it gets interesting. We often treat the emergence of cities as an inevitability, the natural direction of progress. Yet for most of human existence, that path was not taken. Mobile lifeways endured for tens of thousands of years. Agriculture, by contrast, is recent. Urban civilization more recent still. This suggests that what we call civilization is not the default human state. It is one adaptation among many. Modern historians say farming allowed unprecedented growth and scale, larger populations, specialization, technological innovation. But the records show it also brought vulnerability, dependence on specific crops, susceptibility to drought, disease from close living. Complexity increases, but so does fragility. This is where the pattern connects to a larger theme. Human history may not be a straight line from simple to advanced. It may be cycles of reorganization under changing conditions. Not lost high-tech societies, the evidence does not support that, but shifting forms of complexity, some more visible than others. The camera cuts between Ice Age plains, ritual sites, early farms, walled cities. Different solutions to the same challenge: how humans live together in a changing world. This is where the mystery becomes a mirror. We define advancement by permanence, scale, and record-keeping because those are the systems we inhabit. But earlier humans may have optimized for mobility, ecological balance, and oral continuity. Their achievements are harder to see, not because they were absent but because they were not built to last in stone. Modern historians say we must avoid projecting modern values onto the past. Yet we must also avoid assuming that what survives archaeologically defines the full range of human possibility. The camera returns once more to Göbekli Tepe at dawn. Pillars stand in silence, witnesses to a turning point. It sits between worlds. Behind it lies tens of thousands of years of largely invisible human complexity. Ahead lies the era of cities, states, and written history. This is where the mystery reaches its quiet climax. Civilization may not be the moment humans became capable. It may be the moment their capabilities became fixed in forms we could not ignore. And that realization carries a subtle implication. If human complexity once existed in forms that left little trace, if transitions were shaped by climate, memory, and adaptation, then the story of our origins is not just about beginnings. It is about thresholds, moments when one way of being human gave way to another. The camera pulls back into the sky. Continents drift below. Our history, it seems, is not a spotlight starting at cities. It is a long twilight, where most of the world is dim and only a few structures catch the light. At some point, humans drew a line across time. Before civilization. After civilization. The camera pans across a classroom map. Bright markers label Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley. Dates appear. 3000 BC. 2500 BCE. The beginning of history as it is often presented. Clean, structured, measurable. But the records show this line is not found in nature. It is drawn by us. Modern historians use the term civilization as a tool to describe societies with cities, writing, specialization, political institutions. The definition has practical value. It helps organize vast amounts of data. But here's where it gets interesting. Definitions do not just describe reality. They shape what we look for. If we define complexity by cities and texts, then societies without those features appear simple by default, even if their internal systems were intricate. The camera moves across a prehistoric landscape again. No walls. No inscriptions. Yet people move with purpose, guided by knowledge, tradition, and shared meaning. From a distance it looks empty. Up close it is structured. This is where the mystery deepens into something philosophical. We often confuse visibility with importance. Cities are visible. Stone monuments endure. Written records speak across millennia. Oral traditions, ecological expertise, relational power structures. These are harder to see, harder to measure. So the line between before and after civilization may mark not the birth of complexity, but the birth of record-based visibility. Modern historians say writing revolutionized memory. It allowed laws to persist, trade to expand, administration to scale. But the records show writing also filters reality. What is recorded gains authority. What is not can fade. This is where power and memory intertwine. The first states did not just build walls. They built narratives about origins, rulers, order. Written history often begins with kings and gods, not with the everyday knowledge of ordinary people. Which means history from its beginning carries perspective. The camera shifts between early inscriptions and the silent stone circles of Göbekli Tepe. One speaks in text, the other in symbol. One we can read, the other we interpret. But both are expressions of human worlds. This is where the line between prehistory and history becomes less solid. Prehistory is not the absence of history. It is the absence of writing. Modern historians say archaeology, genetics, and environmental science are gradually illuminating that earlier era. Each discovery fills small gaps. But the records show the overall picture remains fragmentary. This leaves us with a tension. We want clear beginnings. Milestones. First. The first city. The first writing. The first state. But human life does not unfold in clean categories. Transitions overlap. Old systems persist alongside new ones. Mobile groups coexist with early farmers for thousands of years. The camera shows a timeline again, but now the boundaries blur. Agriculture appears in one region while hunting-gathering continues elsewhere. Writing arises in one culture while oral traditions remain central in another. The line we drew is useful, but it is also artificial. This realization leads to a subtle but powerful implication. If civilization is a category we constructed to describe certain features, then the world before it was not a void waiting to be filled. It was a different configuration of human possibility. Modern historians say caution is essential when expanding our interpretations. Evidence must lead, not imagination. That caution guides this investigation. We are not uncovering hidden empires. We are uncovering humility. The camera lingers on open landscapes once more, plains, forests, coasts now submerged. For tens of thousands of years, humans lived, loved, learned, and organized their world without the markers we now use to define advancement. Their complexity was real but often ephemeral. Their knowledge was vast but often unrecorded. Their power structures were present, but often relational rather than monumental. And so we arrive at the edge of the mystery. The rise of civilization did not transform humans from simple to complex. It transformed how complexity is stored, displayed, and remembered. The line we drew across time says as much about us as it does about them. The camera slowly fades into the night sky, stars unchanged across ages. Our categories illuminate some truths, but they also cast shadows. And in those shadows lies most of the human story.